You've probably already heard that the more emails you send, the more money you'll make. But here is the question. How do you write daily emails that make money without actually annoying your audience and sounding like a used car salesman? This is where today's guest comes into play. But before getting started, my name is Matt Giaro, and welcome to Build Your Thing, the podcast where we help content creators find their unique creative voice, build their tribe of loyal fans, and monetize their work. My guest today is John Bejakovic. So John writes a daily email newsletter about influence, persuasion, and marketing that's read by a lot of big name business owners and marketers. He's also the author of the great book, 10 Commandments of A-List Copywriters. And in this episode, he's going to pull back the curtain on some of his best kept secrets to write entertaining emails that make money. And with that being said, welcome, John, to the show.
Thanks, Matt. It's very nice to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
It's a pleasure. And John, I've discovered you actually by you running an ad in another newsletter. And I've been on your list right now for, I think, around 8 months. And honestly, I've been really, really enjoying your emails. So I couldn't be more excited to have you on.
Yeah, that's very nice to hear. Thanks for the compliment.
Yeah,
absolutely. I'm very happy to share what I can because I mean, you and I talked, I think, a few days ago about what we could cover in this podcast, and it was just the day after I talked with somebody else. I was talking in a kind of mastermind group, and people were asking me like, "How do you?" It seems like you're never selling in your emails, and you're not pushing, which is very strange because I'm coming from like the direct response copywriting world, and to me it seems like I'm always selling, and I realized that somehow it doesn't seem that way. So that's what I wanted to talk about today.
Awesome. So I think it would be interesting to give our listeners a little bit of background about where you're actually coming from, right? So that perhaps the rest will make a little bit more sense.
Sure. The long and short of it is that I had a traditional job. I decided I'd never really wanted to sit in an office. I was doing IT programming, and I didn't want to do that forever. I didn't like being in an office. I didn't like having a boss. Eventually, I quit my job, started writing online, and I was doing content writing in the beginning, but it was very clear to me that there's a hierarchy and that people who make a lot of money writing online are doing sales copywriting, right? So you can write content or you can write sales copy, and there is, I don't know, a 10 or 100x difference between how much money you can make between those two things. So that time I started to gravitate towards sales copywriting and towards direct marketing and reading about that. And this was around 2015. And at that time it was, I don't know how it is today, but it was easy enough to get jobs on Upwork as somebody who called himself a sales copywriter. And that's what I started doing. And for years, I was working as a freelance copywriter with lots of different businesses. I kind of kept inching up and working with bigger and bigger clients and charging more money. And eventually I started to specialize in a few things. One was emails. The other was, again, like very hardcore video sales letters and very direct response sales copywriting. And during this whole time, I started an email newsletter where I was just using it to kind of practice what I was working on. It was just a sandbox for what I was doing. And over time, I mean, it took a long time because I really wasn't promoting myself at all. But eventually, that newsletter started to get some traction and some people signed up to it. And then more people and a few other people promoted me. And I created some courses and I started selling some courses and a little bit of coaching here and there. And eventually became a nice source of income. And over time, I stopped working with clients, freelance copywriting clients. And this newsletter became a bigger part of what I do. And I continue to do it. I do some things on the side as well because I don't like to be 100% reliant on this newsletter. But it is a major part of what I do today. And really the major part of what I do is just I write a daily email that's basically what we're talking about today, how to make those emails interesting and worthwhile day to day. And at the same time, to have people actually pay you and send you sometimes large sums of money based on a call to action that you put in that email. So
okay,
that's the story.
That makes perfect sense. So one of the interesting things, and I don't know if you are getting this kind of feedback of perhaps clients that you're working on or people who are just like basically on your list. One of the things that I've noticed when I started writing, and when I merely started writing, which means that no video content, no podcast, nothing else, right? I found it's very hard to actually start engaging with the audience on a deeper level, right? Because like you don't feel much let's say, like the written format is not, let's say, like the audio format or the video format, right? So you only have the words. Whereas, let's say, when it comes to podcast audio, like you have, obviously you hear the voice, right? So it's words plus voice, right? Same goes for video. Like you have even another extra element, which is actually the visual part. And I found it actually hard to really engage with people who were only writing. And when it comes to your emails, like I was directly drawn in from the very first email. So it was really kind of intriguing. And I would actually start with that specific part. So how do you actually are able to draw people in, even if they never heard about you before?
First off, thank you for the nice words. I think you're absolutely right where there's trade-offs to different formats or to different media, right? And I think on the one hand, when you write, and we've had books and writing for thousands of years, and writing is very nice because, it forces you to contribute a lot, right? Or forces the audience to contribute a lot. And so, some people have a face for radio and some people have a voice for email. And maybe it's like, okay, just some people wouldn't maybe come across well if they had to make a video or if they had to do a podcast. But if they can write in a way that the audience can still somehow engage with them. But on the other hand, I think you're absolutely right that it's much easier in video. It's much easier in audio. And, these are kind of normal ways that we interact with people. Mm-hmm. In terms of what I do that I think has helped me a lot is one big part of it is that. So I guess one story that I read very early in my copywriting education always comes to mind, and I think this is what I want to bring up, which is that there were two very famous direct response copywriters. One was Gary Bencivenga, and the other one was Gary Halbert. And Gary Halbert was this guy who was kind of like a rebel, and he was out on his own and just kind of doing a lot of crazy direct marketing. And Gary Bencivenga was a very reputable copywriter. He worked at Ogilvy and so on. And yet they had a lot in common. And when Gary Halbert, the rebel, died, Gary Bencivenga wrote this very nice email about Gary Halbert and how whenever Gary Halbert wrote a newsletter, then the other Gary Bencivenga would always have to stop everything he was doing and he would have to read that, And I read that very early in my copywriting education and it really stuck with me. And one of the things that Gary Bencivenga said about the other Gary is that in every email, you would be sure to find out something new, right? And this has been kind of a criterion that I have for every one of my emails, right? Where whatever I send out, there's got to be something in there that's new. Sometimes that's actually a valuable marketing idea. I'm going to share some cool little marketing tidbit, and that's going to light up people's brains. and make them say, oh, okay, that I didn't know that, right? But there's only so many cool marketing tidbits. So sometimes I'll just have some clever turn of phrase, some sort of like little self-deprecating joke, or just like a change of perspective, or just the new little story. It really doesn't have to be a massive thing, but I really, really refuse to send out an email unless there's something in there where I feel like I've put in the work to make it new. And that discipline, I think, trains people to be like, okay, well, yeah, this guy is selling stuff, and yes, he might be telling me things that I already knew, but there is something in this email that's surprising and that's new to me. And if people do that for a few days in a row, then I think they get kind of trained to be like, okay, well, I don't know this guy. I don't really have a relationship with him, but somehow I've heard this repeatedly from people. They're like, I don't know why, but I keep reading your emails. This is what they tell me. And I know why. And that's because I have this discipline of always having something in there that's a little bit of a surprise, a little bit of something new. Right. And I think that it's not really, that's not to say that you shouldn't get on video. That's not to say you shouldn't get on podcasts. You shouldn't hit people from different angles. But it is a kind of trick that you can play so that people will want to read your emails and they'll feel like they have a relationship with you. I mean, it's one small thing. There's lots of other stuff that happens in an email, but I think that this is like a tip that anybody can practice, and it just takes a little bit of extra discipline to write an email the way you might normally write it and to say, okay, this is fine, but what can I insert in there that's something extra that is going to give to people? So that's my answer.
Okay. And do you actually start with this mindset before actually sitting down to write? Do you have kind of do you already have this idea before you sit down writing, or does it come up as you actually start writing?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say in 95% of cases, I have it when I sit down to write, because if I don't, then I end up sitting there and being like, well, what could I say? I could say this, but that's not good enough. I could say that. And I find it's much easier to do it the other way around, where I just go through my day. I take notes of new or interesting things that spark my own interest. And then that list builds up very quickly. And then it's just a matter of saying like, okay, well, what from my list of cool new things that I've found out over the past 24, 72, 96 hours, what could I use for an email? And I sit down and I just write that. And it's much quicker and easier than the other way around.
Okay, so basically you're just trying to be aware about what's happening and kind of letting your brain work in the background to actually come up with those ideas. So and then basically recording them, right? Taking notes so that when you actually have to sit down, you already have material to work with. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And I liked how you said that you allow you take your brain to do the work in the background, because ideally that's really how it happens. I feel like I know somewhere one of my trainings, or I can't remember where, but I said I try to do as little writing as possible. And what I mean by that is that when I sit down to actually write, 75% or 90% of what I want to write is already done, because the idea is there. A little bit of an outline that I just scribbled down in like a notes app is already there. And I just have to kind of shape it and polish it. But it's not like I'm starting from zero and being like, oh God, what am I going to write today? So I never have writer's block because I never sit down to an empty page. I'm always starting with ideas and a skeleton and things that I've collected. And that makes the writing process much faster and easier.
That's interesting. So I think this brings me to another question, which is in terms of your content consumption. Is there anything that you do on purpose to simply feed your brain with specific information? So obviously, I remember that story that you told about you going through going to I think it was kind of a beach somewhere in Spain, right?
Yeah.
So this is basically like when you have those personal story, well, you don't have much control about like what happens to you, right? However, in terms of content consumption, is there anything specific that you're doing to come up with interesting ideas or context?
Yeah, 100%. There is something that I do, and I like to sell this by saying that you got to pay the piper somewhere, and you can either pay by sitting down and struggling over how you write and what you write, and how to have something interesting to say every day and being miserable when you write, or you can do the content consumption, and that to me is to sit down and to read books, and particularly to read old books that other people aren't reading, right? So I think everybody and their mom is probably reading Alex Hormozy's books right now, right?
Yep.
And beyond that, so if there's 10 million people who've read those books, there's 100 million people who've read the latest tweets and the latest stuff and whatever's on Reddit and on Facebook, right? And that means that if that's your starting point, if $100 million offers is your starting point, or if the latest news is your starting point, then you're really going to have to think very, very hard about how to say something unique, how to say something clever, how to have the next hot take so that you can capture that slice of somehow for a moment being unique and different, right? And it's not going to last very long. On the other hand, you can read or consume stuff that is 5 years old or 50 years old or 500 years old or 5,000 years old, because there's content from maybe not 5,000 years old, but definitely from, 2,000 or 3,000 years old. You can still find content from then. And if you read that stuff, A, nobody is reading it, or very few people are reading it probably in your industry. And B, that stuff has survived for a long time for a reason, because it resonates with people. On the other hand, stuff that's going viral on Twitter today won't be relevant probably in another week. And next year, if anybody reads that stuff, they won't even understand what the hell was going on, right? But on the other hand, if you go back and you read something that, some sort of book, whether it's fiction or nonfiction from 50 years ago, that's still around in some way, then yeah, you're going to find valuable ideas in there, and you're going to find surprising things that you can hit your audience with, that they're going to be like, wow, that's super insightful. But it's not that I was insightful. It's just that I spent the time in the evening to read an old book, and that's that.
Yep, I absolutely love that. So this is one of the aha moments that I had. I don't know, maybe it was like four years ago, right? When I was completely overwhelmed with all the information, with all the things that you have to learn. And then I stumbled across this kind of quote unquote theory, right? That you're probably already familiar with, which is the Lindy effect, right? Which you just explained in simpler words, right? So if, let's say you have a book that has survived 2,000 years, the chances of the information in this book surviving for another 2,000 years is way bigger than let's say a best-selling book that just came out last week, correct? So that's the first thing. And the second thing that I really that I 100% also agree with is the fact that you are looking at sources of information that others aren't consuming. And this is really interesting, right? So people talk a lot about, hey, you need to stand out. Hey, you don't want to simply regurgitate what others are saying. And as you mentioned, like there are two ways. Number one is you're simply consuming what everyone else is consuming, and then you really have to sit down and really think very hard to come up with something new, because like the raw material that you have isn't unique, right? It's already something that everybody is already consuming. So how can you actually make something new out of it? Very hard. But what if you throw everything away and simply start with information that others are not consuming, and then you actually connecting the dots, which is something that I really enjoy doing. And I see you doing that too. So I really love that.
Yeah, exactly. You summarized it perfectly. So it's you have a much easier time finding something valuable and new to your audience if you just go outside of the content that they're already consuming.
Yep. So I have really the feeling, I would love to get your thoughts about that, is that number one is you actually start with your domain of expertise, right? So for you, let's just say it's copywriting, right? So you have this kind of foundational information from courses, coaching, mentoring, experience in the trenches that you've acquired over the years. And then comes actually the second part is like adding some kind of new perspective to it. So how do you actually pick the second part of the information, right? So how do you actually decide on what book you're going to read? And are the books or the information that you're consuming directly related to your field of expertise? Do you have kind of a process, or does it simply go with, hey, I'm interested about X, Y, and Z, then let's just pick up a book about that and then just see how it turns out?
Yeah, I think it's both. So I tend to read both books that are related to marketing and to copywriting, and at the same time, also I'm interested in other stuff, and I read other books as well. And I'm fortunate. I mean, maybe I'm not fortunate. Maybe it's very natural. I think the reason that I got into marketing and copywriting is because it matches certain like interests of mine, like some sort of psychology and personal development and things like that. And so some of the books that I read that aren't directly about copywriting turn out to be very relevant, right? So maybe one of the most relevant books that I ended up reading for good illustrations for my newsletter was a book called Phantoms in the Brain. And it's a book about neuroscience. It's a neuroscientist who's talking about, who has a lot of like interesting case studies of people who have various kinds of neural damage and what that tells us about the brain and what that tells us about general human experience. And it's just a very fascinating book. It's not at all about sales. It's not about copywriting, but if you know the basics of copywriting, if you know the basics of direct marketing, persuasion, stuff like that, then suddenly these illustrations become very relevant, and so there's just kind of a natural fit. So, in short, I do both. I try to always read something that's related to kind of my core field, my core competency, but at the same time, I don't want to just be reading business and marketing books all the time.
Okay, that's interesting. So let's assume like you stumble across an interesting info, and then you have this light bulb moment where you actually see, hey, this might be an insight worth sharing. So now comes the time where you are sitting at your desk, you open your laptop, and you just have to write the email. Walk us through the process.
I mean, I'm not 100% sure that my process is going to be relevant to anybody else, because I feel like whenever I listen to how other people write, it seems it's a very unique thing. That said, I mean, again, I really, in most situations, really like to have an idea of what it is that I'm going to say, right? And I've found that I write, like I try to write fast in terms of just getting it all down on paper. And I feel that my best emails come out in a way of just saying like, okay, let me just write this from beginning to end. And if there's any part that is missing, let me just put a placeholder in there. And so I'll kind of write out the entire structure of the email, and I'll know the points I want to make, and I'll know what I want to put there. And if there's a lot of explanation, description, if there's something that's missing, some argument that's missing, some facts that are missing, I'll just put brackets or something like that, and then I'll go back and fill that in. And I feel like that makes sure that the flow of the email is right. And still, that means that doesn't always work in terms of like I sometimes do that, and the end result is I'm not happy with how the email sounds. Another trick that I've used is that I just give myself kind of 3 3 bullet points where whatever it is that I'm saying in my email has to fit into 3 points. So there's like something that I'm saying to open up the email, and that goes in the first bullet point. Then there is some sort of a point or takeaway or lesson that I'm drawing from that, or some sort of reason that I'm sharing that. And that goes in the second bullet point. And then the third bullet point has to be like, okay, well, what now, right? Where do I send people now, or how is that relevant, right? And I feel like writing those 3 bullet points should take me 30 seconds or a minute. And I often realize that whatever is in my head, I can't really fit it into those 3 bullet points. And that's usually a sign that I don't really have like a good idea of what it is that I want to say. And so forcing myself to squeeze it into those 3 bullet points either gets the idea clear or just makes it clear to me that whatever it is that I thought I was going to say, it's not happening, because if I can't come up with this TV guide summary of what it is that I'm saying, then clearly I have some confused mess in my head. And if I spend 20 or 30 minutes trying to develop it into an email, it's not going to work.
Yep, absolutely. Like, this is something that I've been struggling with a lot at the beginning when it came to writing articles. I've written a lot of articles, and usually like my articles used to start like this: hey, I have an idea, I'm in the flow, I just start writing, and then I have my 1,500 words, something like that. Then I go back to it and I say, what's that mess, right? And then I just try to come up with kind of a structure. And then, I spend hours on that piece. And then at the end, I still have the feeling that this is not a publishable piece of content, right? And one of the things that I'm doing today, which more or less goes it's pretty similar to the process that you have, is first of all coming up, okay, like what's the one takeaway? What's the one idea that I want to share, right? And then actually putting this on the page at the top. Okay, so this is exactly what my article, what my email, what have you should be about, and then basically reassessing like my whole piece to make sure that I'm on the right track, right? So simply having this kind of one idea, or in your case, 3 bullet points, clearly laid out so that you know exactly where you're going. Because one of the things is, like, if you are not clear about what you want to share, then how can you expect your reader to walk away with something valuable, right? A confused mind doesn't buy, right?
Yeah, exactly. You got to be clear.
And how about your, like, do you follow any specific structure? Like, do you start straight with, hey, like, I perhaps more or less know the answer because I've read a lot of your emails. But do you start with, hey, yesterday I was reading a book about X, Y, and Z, and here's what the author mentioned, right? So do you start like more kind of a casual way of simply doing things, of simply stating things, like how you actually discovered the idea? Or perhaps is there another structure that you might be using?
I mean, I think that I use multiple structures because my feeling is that it's kind of like asking which food is the best, right? Or which food do you want to have for lunch every day? It's like, well, whatever it is that you pick, it's going to get tiring, right? And if I serve up the same thing every day to my readers, I feel like it gets a little bit repetitive. And I think that, probably the most general structure in the world, not just in my emails, would be like, okay, open up with a story, right? But I know that there are people who write a story every day. And it's, for me personally, it stops being interesting as well, right? There's people who've been, I don't know, there's marketers I know who've been writing a story for literally every day for, I think, probably 10 plus years. I don't even know. But I think probably going on 10 years. And I know that it's a story. And I think that, after a while, I know that there's going to be some sort of a story in there. and I get a little bit numb to it, right? And so I like to switch up things, and yeah, stories are one option, but then there's lots of different things you can do, and I think it's valuable to, again, to keep people a little bit guessing and surprised by what's actually going to be in the email.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. And how about your, so now we actually went through the idea generation process, you writing the first draft. How are you now managing the publication process? So, or perhaps the editing process. Do you let your first draft breathe for a bit, or do you fire things off?
No, I mean, I edit it, but then this isn't a sales letter and it's not a book. Mm-hmm. So when I write it, I edit it to make sure that it's publishable, and then I schedule it in my in my email service thing, and that's that. I let it go.
Okay, so you're not letting your first draft breathe or something like that. It's just like you're writing your newsletter, and you send it perhaps the same or the next day, correct?
Yeah, I send it the same day. I mean, I used to write my emails the night before, but I don't work in the evenings anymore, and I didn't like I also used to write them in the evening for that evening, and I didn't like the stress of leaving it until the end of the day. So now I just write it in the morning and I schedule it to go out in the evening, and that's it.
Awesome. And one of the things that I found are very, very interesting in your emails that I don't really see anywhere else is your unique way of saying things. It's like the imagery that you're using, right? You're not using a lot of imagery. And I think if you would use a lot of imagery, you would actually lose this, I think this interesting effect, right? Everything that you overuse simply becomes, irrelevant. But how do you actually come up with those images? Is this something that you just are used to? Is this something that you actively worked on? I'm curious.
I think, first of all, I think it's interesting that you spot that thing and you say that, too much imagery can be a bad thing. And I think that's absolutely right. I remember hearing Scott Adams, the guy who did the Dilbert cartoons, and he was talking on a podcast. And he said how he's a hypnotist. And in hypnosis, they have the same idea where, lots of times a hypnotist will try to guide you into some sort of imagined space, but they don't want to give too many details, right? Because if they give too many details, then that starts to clash with your own mental picture of it. And Scott Adams actually said how he used that for creating his comic book, because Dilbert, the cartoon that he created, I guess he doesn't have a mouth at all. So he's just got eyes. And people never notice that Dilbert doesn't have a mouth because they somehow mentally supply that. So I think that's a very valid point. In terms of how I do it, I think that's the work of writing. So, sometimes you get inspired, sometimes you don't, and you have to sit there and think and be like, okay, well, I need to have some sort of something here to, again, make this interesting, to make it new, to make it not cliche. What can I put in there? And, sometimes it's a bit of work it's not going to be like fast thinking where your brain just pops up with a solution, but it's going to be sitting there and be like, well, okay, what could I try? And then you try one option, it doesn't work. You try a second option, third option, and then you hit upon something that you're happy with.
Awesome. So until now, we didn't really talk about, how do you tie these emails back to an offer, right? So I would love to know more about that. Like, how are you approaching things in terms of, okay, now you have the idea, now you're following a specific structure, you have all those little elements that we talked about. How do you think about the offer?
I mean, I think it really depends. I think that ideally, and this is what I advise people to do, and this is what I did when I was working for clients, it's not a matter of like, how do I think about an offer and how do I tie things up with an offer. So in the same way that I don't want to sit down and think like, well, how can I have an interesting thing to say today, or what interesting thing that I have to say? So I take that out of the equation, and I basically say, when I sit down to write, I have something interesting to say. Well, in the same way, when I write for clients, or when I'm advising other people how to write their stuff, it's not to sit down to write and to say something interesting and then to think, well, how could I possibly tie this into the offer I'm promoting, right? So instead, take that out entirely and sit down knowing how it is that the thing that you're going to talk about ties into the offer, right? And if it doesn't tie in clearly in your mind, then don't sit down to write that thing. Find something else to write about. That said, in my own personal emails, I often don't do that, and I'll just tack on the offer because, and this kind of ties into the topic of this call, which is that, why my emails sometimes don't feel salesy. And that's because my prime directive for my own email newsletter, my prime directive is not to make a sale. It's not even to benefit my readers, right? My prime directive is simply to keep it going day after day. And if there's something that keeps me from doing that and something that gets in the way, then I will break that. And if something that helps me to do that, then I will do it. And so sometimes I want to write about something and I don't have a clear way to tie that into an offer, or I don't have any kind of a way to tie it well into an offer. And sometimes I will simply write that and connect it to an offer, even though it doesn't connect, and I'll just tack it on and do that there. And sometimes I'll just write something and not even have an offer. And I do that because, again, it makes it so that I'm happier writing my emails. And I think that also kind of changes the tone of how I talk to people, and it changes how people interact with me. And again, it probably means I sacrifice money that I could be making, but it helps me keep doing this for the long term.
Okay, this is very interesting and very profound. So you are actually focusing on the longevity and on the fact that, hey, this is something that I want to continue doing for a long period of time, right? So you kind of optimize, or you always have this at the back of your head. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. It's not at the back of my head. It's front and center. So
okay.
It's kind of like, I enjoy this daily email thing, and I think it's brought a lot of value into my life. I mean, both business-wise, but also in many different ways. I feel like I've learned a lot. I've gotten a lot better as a writer, and maybe one day I'll stop writing daily emails. I don't know, but I want to keep it going, and I find that it's a cumulative thing where the more I do it, the results keep compounding, right? Because on the one hand, I'm accumulating more content than I've written. My list is getting bigger. I keep creating new offers out of the content that I've created. My name is kind of getting out there more. And so, every email that I write is piling onto these thousands of other emails that I've written. And as a result, just the results keep getting better and better. And in the process, I keep learning more. My skills keep growing. And so I want to keep this going, right? And maybe I'm sacrificing something this week or maybe this month, but I think that's a small price to pay for still being around in 1 year's time or in 2 years' time.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And I really think that this kind of long-term thinking is something a lot of people lack when it comes to, especially in your niche, right? Copywriting, online marketing. It's hey, I just want to make the most amount of money in the shortest amount of time so that I can then take this screenshot whatsoever and brag about it on social media. Whereas what I think people who have been in this industry for, several years, they know that, hey, you have always these kind of cycles, right? Where people who are, let's say, at the top or in front of, people's minds won't probably be there in 5 years from now, simply because people burn out, people, suddenly their quote unquote unethical marketing starts, being apparent to everyone. So I really like this this mindset of, hey, my goal is not, let's say, to make the most amount of money in the shortest amount of time. It's just being able to continue to sustain myself in actually doing this thing that I enjoy, that brings value to others, and at the same time simply fueling my lifestyle. I don't know if that resonates with you, or if I put the right words on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I have this theory, that so Rich Schefren, Rich is a really smart marketing and business coach, and Rich had this idea a long time ago that there's opportunity seekers and there's strategic thinkers, right? Mm-hmm. And the opportunity seekers are always after the hot, shiny, bright object, whatever, and the strategic thinkers are thinking long term. But my theory is that everybody who's in the direct response world is like an opportunity seeker who somehow managed to survive. And I feel like I definitely respond to all of those same claims of get rich quick. There's this incredible new thing. You got to do it now. You can make, $50,000 with 2 hours of work in just the next 4 weeks. And my eyes light up. Mm-hmm. But I guess I've gotten burned enough times, and I've realized that just stick with it, do the stuff that works, and keep your keep the animal in the cage in a way. And
yep.
And I think I feel like a lot of other people who have had longevity in the space have probably made a similar trip where they get really excited about direct marketing and the possibilities of making money really quickly. And yeah, maybe they somehow even get success very quickly. But if that's the mentality that you have somewhere, I can't speak for everybody, but I feel like odds are good that somewhere along the line, you're going to get burned somehow, right? So yep. You got to start thinking long-term.
Yep. I love that. John, I have a final question for you. And I don't see you creating content on social media. I guess you're a little bit like me. You don't really enjoy social media. But the articles that I see on your website are basically your daily emails. So what's your kind of strategy to actually getting people onto your list so that they can ultimately read your emails?
This is another thing that I wouldn't advise anybody else to do. So I've done different things to get people onto my list, but I'm honestly not 100% consistent. I haven't been very consistent with any of them, and it's really hasn't been a huge priority for me at this point. I guess the things that have worked well are list swaps have worked very well for me, where there have been people that I promoted them, they promoted me. Another thing that, you and I talked about before were newsletter ads. That's worked well for me. Also, I have that book on Amazon, and that hasn't driven a huge number of people to my list, but it's driven very quality people to my list. And that's why, for example, the thing that I'm focusing on right now is writing another book that I can put up on Amazon. Mm-hmm. And then the final thing that has worked well for me has simply been getting out and getting on podcasts, getting inside of people's paid memberships and giving little presentations there. And again, this isn't, it's not a high volume play where I'm going to get 1,000 subscribers or 5,000 subscribers in a month from that. But ultimately, there's a 99 to, not the 80-20 principle, but I feel like there's a 99-1 principle in direct marketing where, 1 person out of 100 will maybe end up buying something from me. But the thing is that that one person who buys something from me will probably end up buying more than one thing. And maybe they'll end up spending hundreds or thousands or maybe tens of thousands of dollars with me, right? Because they find what I'm doing valuable, or because they end up buying multiple courses and getting value out of that. And so, if I can go somewhere and get a few dozen subscribers, but out of those few dozen subscribers, I get 2 or 3 good long-term customers, then that's a good deal for me. And so, I wouldn't advise anybody to do what I'm doing or to be cavalier about list growth the way that I am. But again, this is just one of the sacrifices that I make, where I'm telling myself, okay, it'll come in time. And I still don't really have a suite of offers that I'm super happy with and that I'm like, okay, this needs to get out there in the world. And I'm working on that. I'm figuring out different stuff, but I feel that it's getting there. And I think that things might click soon in terms of like, okay, I have enough offers, or I have offers that I'm really happy to promote very aggressively. And when that happens, then, I might be running ads, or I might be much more aggressive about doing list swaps, or I might be, just pushing my list growth much more than I'm doing now. But for now, I'm happy just writing an email. The right people find me. I do a little bit of kind of getting my name out there via simply getting into podcasts like this or delivering value in other places, and that's been good enough.
Awesome. John, thank you very much for your time. Is there anything that you'd like to add before we wrap this up?
No, I think we had a really good conversation. I guess there's one final thing that I was thinking about in terms of the actual original topic that we had, which was like what goes into not selling, or selling without sounding salesy. And I think there were 3 things, and I think we've covered 2 of them otherwise. One was just simply this idea of having something new to say. And the other one was this idea of really, doing things that might seem counterintuitive, but doing it with a view to the long term. And there's one final thing, and that's the idea of like, what's really the problem with selling for a lot of people. And I think it's that when people sell, they feel like, okay, I have something, and they feel like they are, replaceable, or they feel like they have to rope people in against their will. They feel like people can reject them, right? And I live in Barcelona, and I have a story about this, which is that 2 years ago, I moved here and I tried to find an apartment, and I had money to pay for an apartment. And it was a crazy time because it was right after COVID, and it was during the beginning of the Ukraine-Russia war. So there was a ton of people moving to Barcelona and all looking to find apartments, all with money. And I can tell you that it didn't matter that I had money. Like, real estate agents just didn't care, and they were not responding to emails and responding to calls. And that's because there were simply that many people who wanted what they had, right? And I think the thing is that a lot of people feel the opposite. They feel needy. They feel like they're replaceable. And so I think there's a lot of stuff that you can do to eliminate that neediness. And part of it is really how you organize your life and how you organize your business, so that when you are making sales, you genuinely aren't needy. And another part is the presentation. And I think there's a lot of stuff that you can do in your marketing, and it comes through in different ways. And, from the language that you use, where if you use the word, you got to get this, you need this, I think that's projecting, and people feel it in a way. But there's also just the way that you hype up stuff that isn't worth hyping up, or just business practices like, taking deadlines and extending them when they don't need to be extended. In subtle ways, this all communicates neediness. And I think that makes it so that puts you in this box of a salesman who's actually the kind of salesman, like you said at the beginning, a used car salesman who's running these kinds of tricks. And if you make a conscious effort to eliminate neediness on the one hand by organizing your business so you don't actually experience neediness, and on the other hand by eliminating it from your communication, then you can sell and you don't feel like selling, and people don't experience it as selling. So that's my kind of final point that I want to share.
The neediness point is really, really interesting. And I would perhaps, follow up with a tiny question is like, how do you organize? You mentioned a very interesting thing, like organizing your business. Like, what do you mean by organizing your business so that you don't have to be needy in your emails?
I mean, I think that basically means like, are you 100% relying on this thing succeeding? Do you need this thing to be successful in order to pay for rent and for food today? Right? Mm-hmm. And there's different ways to ensure against that you can, you can make sure that you have savings so that whether or not you make a sale today, you're going to be okay. You can make sure that you have ongoing continuity offers so that if you put out a new offer, you know that this month you're making a certain number of sales one way or the other, and you're going to be okay, right? And you don't need to desperately cling to people buying your offer today. Or the final thing, which is my kind of favorite thing, is to have other projects, right? I like having my newsletter. I like that it allows me a lot of freedom, that I can write about what I like, that I can create courses about things that interest me, and that I make a good living out of that. That said, I don't want to rely on it 100%. And that's why I always have other things going on in the background, right? And that means that whether or not, if I launch an offer this month and it kind of falls flat, mm-hmm. then I'm okay because I still have other things that I'm doing. Or if I don't want to launch a continuity offer simply because I don't want to create new content every month, or because I'm not 100% convinced that this is a great offer, then I don't need to do it. And I can only create offers and promote offers that I really feel 100% great about. And then in that case, if I do get excited, if I do hype those up, then that's not neediness. Then that's kind of just enthusiasm that translates well. But that goes into saying, I think you and I both, we probably learned a lot from Ben Settle. And I know that at some point, Ben Settle said this thing which sounded super dismissive at the time, but I think it's actually really smart. I think Ben was saying something like, if you're like trying to build an online business, or if you're a freelance copywriter, and if you're going into, let's say, client meetings, and you really need that to work, and you're radiating neediness simply because you actually need that money to pay for rent, then you might be better off just getting a regular job and doing this on the side. And it sounds very dismissive from Ben, being like, oh, just get a job. This isn't for you. But that's not at all what he's saying. He's really saying, like, just do this as a side gig, because just knowing that that you don't actually need this thing in order to pay for food, in order to pay for rent, puts you in such a better position, right? And that's something that is going to make you more successful. And that's something that I like to keep going even now that I'm more established. I don't need to get a regular job at the grocery store. I don't need to drive Uber. But at the same time, I like to have other things that I'm doing so that my newsletter isn't the only thing, and so that I don't feel that neediness, because the best way not to radiate neediness in your writing is not to actually feel neediness. Right? So,
yeah, I think there is a lot of subconscious stuff going on, and like I'm glad you tackled that at the end of our conversation. So thank you very much, John, for coming on the show. It was a pleasure talking to you, and questioning you about your process, about how you write those very interesting emails. And if people want to read your emails and perhaps even buy from you, where should they go?
Just go to my website. It's my last name, so bejakovic.com. And if you go there, you can opt in to my newsletter, and that'll get you onto my daily email list. If you don't want to opt in, then I think if you just type my name into Google, then the first result is going to be my website. And then from there, you can very easily see that there's like an archive of my past emails, and you can just read without opting in. If opting in is more of a commitment than you feel like doing right now.
Awesome. As usual, I'm going to put the link I'm going to put the links, actually plural, because I'm also going to put the link to not only to your website, but also to your copywriting book that you can grab on Amazon, I think for $5 or $10, something like that. So definitely also, I've been rereading this book. I think it's like the second time that I'm reading it, and I still plan to go through it several times. It's a short read, and it actually gives you some counterintuitive insights that you might not find in quote unquote classic copywriting books. It really helps you think more proactively about some specific aspects when it comes to copywriting. So definitely a book that I recommend. So thank you very much, John, for your time. And I hope to welcome you soon on another episode.
Great. Thank you, Matt. This was very enjoyable, and I hope that your listeners get something useful out of it.
All right, so hope that you've enjoyed this episode. And as always, you're going to find all the links we mentioned in the show notes. And if you're a content creator or want to become one and want to monetize your knowledge online, then be also sure to check out my free emails, because in my daily emails, you're going to learn how you can speed up your content creation workflow to create more content faster and thus attract more clients online in less time. It's the first link in the description. Thank you very much for tuning in today, and I see you next week.